You're probably wondering, if you don't know me already, why mushrooms? Why space? And maybe even why me amongst it all? And well, I'm a nutrition scientist and I have this obsession with mushrooms. I absolutely love eating them and researching them. But I also say yes to insanely crazy ideas. And unfortunately, this one was my idea, so I have no one else to blame for saying yes to it. And it's really how we sent mushrooms to space. And I'm here today to talk about the mission, how it came about, why mushrooms, why space, and how I believe that this is going to help us create that future food system that we are all working towards at the moment. So in terms of like why mushrooms, I do have an obsession with it and I do love it, but I actually have published quite a lot in the area. So I've published in terms of the nutritional composition, the culinary applications, what are the bioactives in mushrooms, all relating to nutrition and health. So it is an area that I'm particularly interested in because I do believe they have a unique role in our dietary guidelines. But I've also done formal training in space studies. So I do believe that space is going to help feed our future. It's already shaped our past and our food system today. And we are in a next space generation. The children today are probably going to grow up with the option of going to space for fun. And all that research and R&D that's happening, we can leverage in those long duration missions that we're going to have on the moon with Artemis, and of course those explorations to get to Mars, because the beauty of sending humans to space is that we still have to eat, and we have to find some solutions for that constrained closed loop system that we can then plonk here on Earth in urban environments, in places where there's food equity that's needed, or increased access to nutritious and delicious foods that are sustainable. So that's why space as well. And I'm now going to give a bit of a background and how this whole Mission Mushroom came about. So given my expertise in nutrition science and in space, I am very much involved in the space sector now. I've published in the area as well, and I'm part of many groups from the Deep Space Food Consortium, Plants for Space, Space Farming Brazil, and Space Nutrition Network. So if anyone is interested in finding out more about how those space food systems can help advance agriculture and food systems on Earth, please reach out to me. So why edible mushrooms? This is the case of, I was researching mushrooms and then layered space on top and went, wow, mushrooms are the absolute perfect space crop. And I'm just going to show you briefly why that is before I talk about the mission. So because mushrooms are fungi, they sit in this unique biological kingdom that gives them those unique properties that you find in animals, but you also find in plants. And genetically, they are actually closer to us humans than they are to the plants we eat, even though we kind of clump them as a vegetable. But from a biological perspective, but also from a nutrition perspective, they don't really fit in that vegetable food group because they do have quite a lot of unique nutrition across the food groups in our dietary guidelines. One of the key things that's quite unique to mushrooms that no other vegetables can do is that they have ergosterol, and that's a precursor to vitamin D. And just like the one in our skin, 7-dehydrocholesterol, it's just like one double bond difference, a different carbon. It's very similar to what's found in humans, and it can produce active vitamin D when exposed to UV light. And it's a lot of vitamin D that it can produce. It's not a little. So having about 100 grams of mushrooms exposed to UV light will produce 1,000 IUs of vitamin D. And that's basically the requirement for every single Australian. And vitamin D deficiency is a big problem on Earth. But when it comes to space, it's also really important because in the space environment, along with the UV that we get to make vitamin D, you also get other radiation, like gamma radiation, that's ionizing and damaging to the human body. So what's the solution? Really only diet. But diet, there aren't many foods that can provide 1,000 IUs of vitamin D. So intake in space is inadequate. So astronauts are supplemented with 1,000 IUs of vitamin D, because vitamin D is very important for bone health as well. And when we're in a space environment, there's no gravity, so the bones become quite porous quite quickly. And vitamin D is a countermeasure to prevent that spaceflight-induced associated bone loss. So it's very unique, right, to the space environment. You can't get it from food. It's the one thing that they, one of the supplements that they get. And we've shown in research through all that mushroom work that we've done that we've modeled that you can actually meet vitamin D recommendations by adding UV exposed mushrooms to the diet. And then we've done a feasibility study in aged care where 80% have vitamin D shortfalls or insufficiency or deficiency. And we added these vitamin D mushrooms to the diet and showed that we can increase the provision and the intake of vitamin D. Now, you're probably asking, well, does that matter? Will it actually increase vitamin D status? And in answer to that question, it can, and it has been shown to. So there's research where they compared the UV exposed mushroom food, which was a soup, versus a non-UV exposed mushroom soup compared to a supplement. And it was as effective as a supplement to increase blood levels. So now you know it's unique. It increases vitamin D in the diet. So it's a very unique solution when it comes to that shortfall nutrient. Now, the thing is, it's great in vitamin D, but what's really cool about mushrooms as a space crop is that it does have that unique composition of different nutrients. Now, often when you think of a vegetable or a plant, there's a couple of key nutrients in each food. So, they might be really high in vitamin C and potassium, or might be really high in magnesium and folate. But what's really cool about mushrooms, because they're fungi, they're actually really high in a bunch of different nutrients. So it's more than a quarter of daily intake of like 7 different nutrients, 10% for another 3, and 100% of vitamin D. No other food can provide that level of nutritional density. So it is quite unique. And in the space sector, we want to grow enough crops to to make a significant contribution to the nutrition, in addition to the countermeasure of growing food and the psychological effect that has on humans, which is also very important. And then to layer on top of the actual nutrition that it offers bioactive compounds that are quite important and powerful for the space environment and for health. One of them being ergothioneine, which is dubbed the longevity vitamin. We have specific receptors for it, even though we don't have a recommended daily intake. And mushroom, just like the vitamin D, it blows every other food source out of the water when it comes to ergothioneine. And all the health effects, and this is your Agaricus bisporus, which is a common, button portobello mushroom that you can buy from the supermarket. It has been shown to have quite a lot of health benefits that are relevant for the space environment, like inflammation, immune function, cancer, gut health, and heart health. So another benefit, the nutrition is pretty solid, but then there's also that culinary one, which is important in space, because in space, it affects our sensory and our taste receptors, and salt is one taste that we lose. So things still taste salty, but you need a lot more salt to taste the same saltiness of the food in space. And mushrooms have the 5th basic taste, umami, which enhances that salty taste, but also lowers the amount of salt needed in food. And again, it's a countermeasure to bone loss to reduce salt, because high salt diets can exacerbate that calcium that's leached in the blood. So it's got, the vitamin D, which is unique, those nutrients, the bioactives, the umami, the salt reduction. And currently, NASA's prioritizing crops that are whole food over supplements. We want to get nutrition from crops as much as possible, because we don't want to just be supplementing the diet fully with pills instead of eating actual food. We know the importance of, from gut motility to psychological health, that we need actual food as well. But in addition to that nutrition, from a crop perspective, it's really the ultimate space crop. So looking back to about a year ago, I was actually writing up my paper to present at the International Astronautical Congress these reasons on why I believe that mushrooms are the absolute perfect space crop. And I was really surprised that we didn't actually already have mushrooms growing on the International Space Station. It's kind of been overlooked as a crop. The focus has really been on plants. And this was the proposal where I came in and went, look, combining my nutrition expertise and my expertise in mushrooms, it's a real opportunity, because it ticks all the space crop candidate boxes when it comes to which crops do we want to choose to grow in that closed loop ecosystem of space. And it also adds more. So it doesn't replace plants, right? But it does provide quite a lot that plants can't do. And plants provide a lot that mushrooms can't do. For example, producing oxygen, providing that beautiful green space that we know is also important. But what's really cool about mushrooms and mycelium, which is the organism where mushrooms fruit from, mycelium can be made into almost anything. So you can actually be made into architecture. I was at a conference earlier this year in Ohio where a researcher created mycelium blocks and showed the comparison of breaking the mycelium blocks compared to concrete, and it was stronger than concrete. So it's really exciting for space because you can actually create architecture to grow the plants or to grow the mushrooms, but also for humans to live in from the mushrooms, which is very exciting. And it helps also recycle. You know, we heard as well how important it is to recycle food. It can turn any waste, both food and anything that contains carbon, really, into degrading it and turning it potentially into more compost to grow more plants. So there's a lot of applications beyond nutrition, but I'm coming in from that. It really ticks a lot of boxes from a nutrition perspective as well. So what was our mission? So I was harping on about how mushrooms are the perfect space crop. I presented at the big International Space Congress, just came back from that Congress, and there was an EOI that went out to all the members of the Space Industry Association of Australia, of whom FOODiQ are members. And there was a call out for anyone that has research experiments to send to space. And I'm like, yes, I do. I know exactly what I want to send. And I responded to that EOI, and there was a little bit of back and forth confirming, do we have astronaut time, which is really rare to get in space experiments. It's usually very expensive to use astronaut time. So it was a really unique opportunity. Long story short, I came back, met with SpaceX, and a week later, basically, I got the email saying, congratulations, you're on the FROM2 mission. And that's really how it came about. SpaceX liked the idea. Eric Phillips, who's the astronaut on the mission, really liked the idea. And it was an Australian-led experiment that was flown with an Australian astronaut. So here you've seen our patch that we have for the mission. So with space experiments and any space missions, you have a patch that's associated with it that represents the mission. It was my team member, Ralph Ritchie, that came up in a Zoom call, the name Mission MushVroom. And I went, actually, we really like it. It's easy. It sounds like mushroom. Let's go with the name. And it's like mushrooms vrooming into space. And the whole idea here on the patch is that ship is the FROM, which was the first ship on Earth to go to the polar ice caps. And this mission that we were on is the first time humans went to space in the polar orbit and observed the polar ice caps from space. So it's a nod to the mission and also a nod that it's Australian-led with the Southern Cross. And Eric actually became the first Australian astronaut to fly to orbit trained under the Australian flag. So it was a very significant Australian first mission all across. And our team, as I mentioned, Ralph Ritchie. So when I got that UI and got on the mission, it was really like, okay, now how are we going to do this? So being a smaller company and more agile as well, and having the connections in the space sector already, I roped in Ralph to be part of the team. He's actually a retired NASA deep space food expert. And then he put me in touch with Annie, who was an intern at NASA at the time, who's now doing her PhD at Cambridge University on plants for space. And they were my Florida-based team that was working with our Australian-based team to figure out how we're actually going to send with the constraints of the mission that we had, the time and the resources and funding, because at this stage we had no funding. We were like, let's just self-fund this mission and see what happens. So the objective of the mission was really to see, can mushrooms make a good space crop candidate? There was a lot of research on specifically looking at oyster mushrooms just because of their short end-to-end crop cycle and their ability to be quite versatile in the temperature changes, humidity changes, and still be able to grow reasonably well. So we wanted to assess if oyster mushrooms could colonize and fruit in a space environment with a vision of creating this bioregenerative in situ food production system for those long duration missions in space. So our primary aim was to determine how the mycelium colonizes in the space environment. So not only is there the lack of gravity, but there's also radiation that's much higher. And the radiation in that polar orbit is very similar to the radiation on the International Space Station. So even though our mission was quite short, we still got a good dose of radiation potentially to alter mycelium growth. And then to determine if they can actually fruit in space as a secondary outcome. And then tertiary outcomes are really around anything else that we can do with what we got, with limited resources and time and constraints that we have. If we can look at anything else and determine the differences, it'll be really pilot data for future research. So the experiment constraints were quite small. So sending anything to space is really, really expensive. So it's all mass times volume, and hence why food really hasn't been super prioritized yet in low Earth orbit, because it is quite expensive. We need better solutions for food systems. So we got the acceptance in November. The net, or no earlier than launch date, was 1st of March. And we know in Australia, everything shuts down over Christmas, New Year's, right? So it was a little bit insane in terms of the timeline, how long we had. And because we got into this mission, everyone else, there were 22 other experiments. So about 20 other experiments had already been this for 18 months. So we kind of came in because someone pulled out. We were the substitute mission, and we had to really work backwards with timelines because we've already missed all of them. So it was very exciting. We got Lifecycle, which is an Australian company, to donate all the kits, and their scientist, Laura, worked with us to see if we can create the kits of the right size to still be able to fruit some mushrooms and everything that came with it. I won't go into too much detail, but it was great to have the support of Lifecycle as well. And we weren't using optimized growing conditions. This is just proof of concept. Let's send something to space and see what happens. So we really had to figure out the best solution to maintain temperature and humidity, and of course, minimize the CO2 that would build up. So the materials that we ended up with, this is the size of the substrate block. All that white stuff, for those that are not familiar, is the mycelium colonized on the block. And then we put it within plastic with a one-way valve. So the two-way valve, so the carbon dioxide can go in and out of the valve. And then we also we thought we'd only get 3, but we actually got 6 Falcon tubes fit into that space and approved by SpaceX. So we got 6 Falcon tubes with the colonized substrate as well, with mycelium in it. And this is what it looked like. We took pictures of the block and the Falcon tubes pre-flight, and then packaged it up in a secret container, and then sent to space. But in terms of all the pre-flight testing, so we're like, can we actually get enough mushrooms and information that we need for this experiment with the size and constraints we have? And we could actually get 2 fleshes out of the block, and they were quite significant, anywhere between 150 to 200 grams harvest in our testing. So we were pretty confident that we had a system that could, actually be able to grow the mushrooms. And it was hours and hours at the Space Life Sciences Lab. This is a lab right by the Space Kennedy Center, right beside 39A, or the launch pad where the Falcon 9 rocket, where carrying the Dragon capsule with the astronauts and our mushrooms were in. Very close. So we were able to do all our prep and analyses at the lab. And thanks to the generosity of the University of Florida's Estrellas Center. So they donated lab space for our mission, which was incredible. That's one thing that I love about the space sector, is that everyone's on that same mission to advance research and with that aligned purpose. And it was really nice to get all that help across the space sector, including NASA, who consulted with us along every step of the way to make sure we could get this opportunity right. So I'm very thankful for all the space sector support as we made this happen from Australia. And then, as you can see, this is the end of the day. Once we had everything ready, which took hours and hours and hours of prep time, we're absolutely exhausted end of day. And this is us handing over to Samuel from SpaceX. And on the right-hand side is our control. So we use the same, where the same blocks grew, the same substrate to be our ground controls while the other samples went to space. And this is the From 2 on launch. That day was actually really incredible. It was a massive thunderstorm. We thought that probably we aren't going to launch. And then just imagine you've got a biological sample. A lot of the experiments on human space flight aren't biological. They're usually things like measuring sleep and heart rate and lots of different experiments. But there was about 4 of us that had biological samples. So you've got to be thinking, if it doesn't launch that day, what's the turnaround? When do you get to exchange your samples? There's a lot of chaos that happens. And that day it was just like thunderstorm. As soon as the sun set, we thought perhaps it's not going to launch, but the window opened up. It was the right time, to get into the polar orbit, the right angle, and everything aligned, and we launched when we thought we would. So it was very exciting. We were at the Space Life Sciences Lab. We were as close as we could get to the launch so we could see it. And it was beautiful at night because the sky just completely lit up, and you could feel the sonic boom from the rocket as you're watching it launch, thinking, on top of that thing, there's like 4 people and our mushrooms. So it was very exciting to watch in person. So as part of the experiment, what we had this protocol where we did all the photos pre-flight, and then during the flight, all we could get, we wanted more, but all we could get really was for our astronauts to take photos and videos of every angle, 360 photos and videos of all our Falcon tubes and our substrate block. And this is us, the few crew waiting at a coffee shop for it to splash down for us to get the handover from SpaceX of all our biological samples and go straight to the lab for analysis. So as soon as the samples landed and we got them, we went straight to a laboratory to do some microscopy and then prepare the samples for the nutritionals to be analyzed. So what did we do in terms of post-gravity? We're still currently doing a lot of the analysis now, but I can confirm that the mycelium continue to grow in the space environment. There are differences that are actually quite interesting that we're analyzing between the space-grown versus the Earth-grown. And similar to what other mycelium research that has been done from that architecture perspective as well, which is really interesting that it aligns. And we're just analyzing still the nutritionals. If we have enough samples preserved, they're frozen, we might be able to do some genetics as well and see if there's been any differences in the DNA from the radiation exposure. We also got a lot of media on this, and I think it just shows how you can translate science and research and make it relevant. This was an example of how food is so important. And I think one of the reasons why we got a lot of media is because we made space relevant using food. And I think that's the power of food and the future food systems and all the research that everyone's doing is that everyone eats. So everyone has an interest in what the future of food looks like. And I think it's important that as researchers, we translate that science as well and not just leave it at the journal level in a peer-reviewed paper. So what's next? Well, we're presenting that research at the next International Astronautical Congress, which is in Sydney, Australia. So if you're around, there's a public day on October 3rd. The conference goes from the 29th of September to October 3rd. And you just got to register. It's free to register. There'll be 12 NASA astronauts. There'll be a whole space station mock-up of the Haven 1 from VAST that's actually being sent to space to replace the ISS. So it's very exciting. I highly recommend, especially if you have children or teens, to come watch, and I'll be speaking there as well. So in terms of research, there's more than 2,000 edible varieties of mushrooms, right? So oyster is one, but there's so much more research that can be done on other varieties, on using AI and robotics, to harvest and monitor. So we've actually put in another EOI with SpaceX and VAST to do MushVroom 2, and we're waiting to see if we're successful with that. But there's a lot more we can do to actually start creating that, mushroom as a crop, space crop system in space. But all those learnings that we've already had from space and agriculture, it might be, a different mutation that gives an advantage in the crop that is discovered only because it's been exposed to the lack of gravity and radiation. There's a lot that we can discover from research that has been sent to space, but also all the technologies of maybe that portable UV pulse. If we can figure it out in a space station, we can use it inside homes probably. There's also the substrate research, like what is the best substrate to grow these mushrooms in space, the farm architecture. Of course, we can do research looking at astronaut vitamin D status, and of course, doing actual RNA analysis in microgravity to get that, instantaneous look at what's happening at a genetic level. So I'd love to thank everyone that's been involved, the support from Future Food Systems to help make this happen, Space Industry Association of Australia, Australia's Space Institute, who gave us all that lab space and quite a lot of equipment to use, NASA for collaborating with us and consulting along the way, and of course, Life Cycle as well for donating all their time and kits to make this happen. In addition to, of course, the FOODiQ team, the From2 crew, and the SpaceX crew that helped make this happen and, give us the opportunity to do research that's going to improve human health globally. So thank you very much.